This is AI's greatest project yet, comparable to the Manhattan Project, the development of the atom bomb, the nuke used on Japan. That's the scale of the project we're talking about today. The scale of Project Stargate is so staggering that it kind of questions, how are things going to get bigger than this? And where does AI go from here? So first, we all know AI has slithered and made its way into pretty much every single part of our lives in some way. Big tech companies, as you can see here, pretty much collect every piece of information that we have, aside from Social Security, thank God. We can now vibe code entire software applications without having a lick of a clue of how to code. I'm sure you can attest, as I can too, the absolute pounding that we receive by ads across every social media platform, mainly YouTube. It's frustrating. College students are cheating more than ever before. So whether we want to talk about the positive or negative impact doesn't really matter. That's a topic for another video. Let's just get into the facts and let's get into Project Stargate. So first things first, what do you know? A neural network is pretty complex. We're going to try to simplify AI and neural networks in a couple minutes here, so bear with me. Again, I think it's important to remind everybody that AI isn't some all-knowing, some omniscient power, right? All it does is compute a whole different things at the same exact time, and based on those correlations, it can make some probabilistic determination of what's going to come next. It's not Ultron, it's not Skynet. As humans, when learning a language, we break it up into a bunch of different lessons, right? First, you need to learn about the letters, then the words, then how to combine those words and create meaning in those sentences and meaning in conversations. But it's important to know AI does none of that. It doesn't understand anything about letters, words, sentences. It doesn't understand a language. However, what it can do that humans can't do is look at hundreds of millions of different passages. In other words, it's learning or training. Look at different letters, different words, different sentences, and decide, hey, this word usually comes before this word based on the hundreds of millions of different passages that I just looked at. So let's look at this example here. The cat sat. These are the three words that have already been determined. And now the AI has to determine, hey, what word is going to come next? So after sat, we probably expect a preposition, right? As a human being, that's what we'd expect. The AI doesn't know any of that. But what it does know in the hundreds of millions of passages is that on was a popular word. One of the most popular words that followed the word sat. Since it has the highest probability to be the next word, it populates that next box, that next token with the word on. So there might have been, a 0.5, in other words, 50% probability for on. Then after that, it might be 0.45. And then Matt, this one might be a little more uncertain, but 0.2 was still the highest probability of the bunch. So it chose this word. In one of the articles, sat was next to the word jingle. Wow, that's strange. What the hell does that have to do with anything? Well, it doesn't, and that's why the probability of this being jingle was 0.0001, and hence the AI would never select that next word. Again, we're oversimplifying here, but I hope this gets the point across of just how much information AI needs to consider when making these individual decisions. This could be expanded to, paragraphs or pages of information. The AI uses a context window. So for example, this might be our context window. Let's just do CX window. Kind of like a human needs context to understand what exactly is going on. For those of you that care out there, so probably none of you, this is how you'd express it mathematically. We can skip over this. A question you might have for the AI is something like, should I subscribe to this channel? And the AI would probably associate words like dope and cool, probably with very high probabilities, so you probably should subscribe. Look at that. High probabilities, dope and cool, subscribe. So in conclusion, it's just a process of very simple mathematics that is repeated billions or trillions of times per second to make a best guess as to what next word it should say until it forms, a complete answer, a complete paragraph, a complete story, whatever you ask it to do. But we skipped over something there. Billions or trillions of operations per second, that's ridiculous. To perform billions or trillions of operations per second, we need a lot of processing power, a lot of compute. And that's where your good old friend NVIDIA comes in and saves the day. What else would you expect? They sell GPUs that do a lot of things simultaneously. And as we just saw, AI needs to do a lot of things. We need to consider a lot of different words regarding a lot of different contexts all at the same time and pick the one with the best probability. And yeah, you can see the computing power. That's exactly what NVIDIA provides. In 2016, we went from 19 T-flops, floating point operations. Just think the amount of things it can do per second. We went from 19 T-flops, 19 trillion things per second, to 20,000 T-flops in 8 years. About a 1 1000x. And don't worry, it's only gonna get crazier. You'd think it's slowed down. Nope, it's speeding up. By 2025, we're expecting to have the Vera Rubin. And 2026, I think later in 2026, we're expecting to have the next version of Rubin, which will have 100,000 T-flops. That's nearly a 5,000x. Yeah, that's right. 5,000 times what we had just 10 years ago. So you can see the expansion and the development of this technology is just getting ridiculously fast. And again, I think, at least when I first saw these numbers, I was like, is this really necessary? Do we really need to be producing chips that can do 100,000 trillion operations per second? I mean, isn't it just becoming a little unnecessary? Well, let's look at an example. That always helps. We have this query by some very strange user. I like dog so much, I might marry one. Now, we won't judge this human or this user for their values, but what we will do is look at just how many T-flops it took to produce the output that you see on screen here. I'm not going to read it. You can if you want. 23 trillion T-flops to produce this output instantaneously. Again, this is an estimation. You could go all sorts of ways. It's highly dependent on how many billions of parameters is involved in the model, but just take my word for it. It's an estimation. It's accurate enough for our understanding. So you could imagine as queries get more complex, then, I like dogs so much, I might marry one, probably produced by a very, very young human being with not super high intelligence. Just how much AI compute we're gonna need and going to use. Especially when we start talking about images, audio, videos. That's where things start to really blow up. I don't know how many T-flops this would take, but it certainly took longer to produce this output, you can see on screen here, than it did that output. And someone's obsessed with dogs, whoever wrote these queries. Anyways, so again, we just talked about AI compute, the chips that are actually used to process all this information. But to process this information and actually use these chips, we need power. Electricity. And as you can see, electricity usage due to data centers is absolutely blowing up. Now let's reel it in. Let's bring it back to a human application. We're really deep into the AI world right now. Let's bring it back to how does this impact you and I? Well, we have this headline, big tech's AI data centers are driving electricity bills up for everyone. And you can see that the price of electricity, at least in the United States, has been absolutely ripping higher, and the trend is certainly in that direction as well. So let's just imagine you have a friend, John. This is John. Hey, John. John happens to live in Florida. And if you didn't know, Florida in the July and August months has an average temperature that ranges from somewhere between 90 and 95 degrees Fahrenheit and gets as high as 95 to 100 plus. So obviously you need air conditioning because you don't exactly want to be sweating inside your own home. And now his monthly electricity bill is getting up to $400 to $500 per month during peak months, during these summer months. Obviously, he isn't too happy. Let's put a sad face on John. Not happy. It's so bad sometimes in Florida, and this probably happens all over the world in hot locations as well, but the paint on cars outside is essentially, for all intents and purposes, melted off. So you can see, you definitely need AC to live a comfortable lifestyle. All of a sudden, John cares a whole lot less about how good the newest and latest ChatGPT model is, and more about living in a house without profusely sweating. The good news is, as energy projects, especially these larger ones that are going to be needed to power Project Stargate, electricity cost shouldn't continue to skyrocket. If anything, supply will go up, demand for electricity will come down, and hopefully prices will come down with it. But temporarily speaking, there is certainly high impact for us people. So we went over why AI needs trillions to quadrillions to eventually quintillions of operations performed per second to get an answer to your well thought out questions. Let me highlight that one there. All in a reasonable amount of time, which takes up a lot of electricity. Now all we need to do is connect all these different chips, all this energy infrastructure up together in one integrated system and house it in a facility that can fit it all and cool those chips down because they get very, very hot. And that, my friends, is essentially Project Stargate in a nutshell. Essentially a data city that is being constructed in Texas 24/7, supposed to be all finished up by 2026. There's rumors about funding being an issue. We're not going to get into that stuff. We're just going to look at the facts. But companies like SoftBank, obviously OpenAI, you know they're always involved in this stuff. They're taking the financial brunt of this investment, and OpenAI is taking over the operational side. They're going to be trying to produce the next great ChatGPT, except for larger scale problems. And again, I've talked at length in a couple of videos recently about how these software AI companies are making zero money, and I saw a lot of your comments, especially on this video here, very concerned about, you know, the state of AI investment and if these companies will ever make enough money to offset the amount of money that they're burning. But this project Stargate is receiving no funding from the federal government, supposedly, and is being backed privately. And this is what Sam Altman has to say about making back that $500 billion that they're spending on Project Stargate.
Explain the math to us. How does it all add up to needing $500 billion?
Well, that covers the capacity we think we need for the next few years, given our growth projections. The interesting question is if we knew how to get $1 trillion right now, which we don't, would we be able to deploy that profitably in the next few years? And I'm not sure about that, but I feel confident we can make 500 billion of value back.
That's interesting. All right, pretty funny, I guess, to be unsure about making $500 billion back. But, you know, we won't go into the depths of this thing again. I already went over it in that video I just mentioned. So getting back to the point, we understand just how big this Project Stargate is. I mean, most AI labs are working with anywhere between thousands and tens of thousands of GPUs. Stargate is aiming for millions, all AI specialized. Large AI models that usually take months to train could be trained in weeks or even days. We could literally run experiments on a global scale multiple times over a month, which is crazy to think about. We can also see some of the best models in the world today. Let's call ChatGPT 5 one of those. Cost anywhere from hundreds of millions to billions of dollars to train. So, what do you think models on Project Stargate are going to cost to train? So you can imagine the cost of these models will be... Yeah, no, it doesn't go high enough. Models that explore these very complex and interconnected problems that span industries, populations, medicine, etc. They're going to cost a lot of money. The Manhattan Project, as we mentioned at the beginning of this video, cost about $30 billion in today's dollars. The project that resulted in the nuclear bomb. So let that sink in just how absurd a $500 billion investment is. This project is absolutely insane. And just for some context of this clip that we're going to watch coming up, big tech companies have been aiming to go carbon neutral or net zero emissions by 2030, simply meaning the amount of greenhouse gases that are produced are offset by the amount of greenhouse gas removed from the atmosphere. Now let's see what the CEO of Crusoe, the construction contractor working on Stargate as we speak, has to say about that.
Every major tech company has this net zero pledge by 2030. Are our AI ambitions running directly counter to our climate goals?
It's complicated. My personal perspective is none of those pledges are going to be met by 2030. It's just like fundamentally not possible.
So the tech companies are lying. Or fudging it.
Nice. I guess this really comes as no surprise. I just thought that was funny. He's legit laughing out loud at the idea of tech companies meeting their promise. But again, a lot has changed, to be fair. Did they really anticipate AI needing this much energy when they made these promises, 5, 10, some 20 years ago? Projections change, estimations change. I just thought it was funny that at this point, we're all openly admitting that the energy infrastructure just isn't there to support a project on this scale, at least to keep consumer electricity prices manageable. And as we can see, those are absolutely skyrocketing right now. We already talked about all the things that this Project Stargate will really demand and the things that it will need. I think the three general categories that we can talk about here are AI chips, energy providers, and cloud computing. And as we know, NVIDIA has an absolute stranglehold on the AI chip world. They're worth somewhere around $4.3 trillion as a company right now, probably bigger than just about every country on the planet. And remember, NVIDIA doesn't produce their chips. They design their chips and then outsource that production to, in the most part, TSMC out of Taiwan, which you can see here, 70% of Taiwan Semiconductor's manufacturing is allocated to NVIDIA. So these guys pretty much run a duopoly on this space right now. Next, we have energy providers. Now, I really like these three right here. The first two, Vistra Energy and Constellation. And again, we briefly just touched on how these big tech companies want to rely on clean energy to meet those net zero emission pledges that they made some odd years ago. In order to meet those pledges, they're going to have to shift to cleaner sources of energy, one of the best forms of those energies being nuclear. And I go through in great detail each energy source and why it's beneficial and the pros and cons of everything and rank them all in this video here. That one took me a lot of time. Check it out if you're interested. But anyways, Vistra and Constellation, you can see, lead the pack when it comes to nuclear capacity. In other words, the amount of nuclear energy they can generate. And I also know Vistra does a lot of in-house manufacturing, so they're very competitive when it comes to getting contracts in the nuclear space. That's a competitive advantage that certainly puts them leagues ahead of their competition. So these two companies are definitely ones to keep an eye on. The other one down here is EMCOR. Now, EMCOR builds out for the most part electrical infrastructure, and they're really betting heavily on this data center build out. They're acquiring companies who deal with high voltage systems and prefabrication. And so I think that will probably drive growth for them for the foreseeable future, at least until these data centers are built out. EMCOR isn't the only one. It's just the one that I've taken the most interest in. And finally, we have the players that are actually going to use these chips on a daily basis. Cloud computing, cloud service providers. We have Amazon, Amazon Web Services, Google, Google Cloud, and Microsoft, Microsoft Azure. There's many others out there, but these are three of the biggest cloud service providers. And I think you see a trend of these companies that we're looking at, right? None of them are the profitless AI companies, the gold and the gold rush. A lot of them are just providing the infrastructure needed for these companies to try their best at becoming profitable. So why take a gamble and why guess at which AI company is going to actually make money and monetize their software? And just invest in the pickaxes and shovels, right? The chips that provide the AI compute, the energy providers that provide the electricity and the energy infrastructure, and then the cloud computing for these softwares to actually host and run their softwares on and utilize those AI chips and energy infrastructure. Personally, I think Google's probably the most undervalued out of these two right now. Microsoft is getting a lot of hype because they have such a big stake in OpenAI. Amazon actually has been down a lot recently too. So Google and Amazon struggling, certainly more so than Microsoft is right now. And as we can see, that cloud computing market is only growing faster and faster. So I hope this video helped kind of shed some light on Project Stargate and just how absurdly large in the scale of this project really is. Again, we went through basic analysis of AI and why it's so compute intensive. Everybody always wants the latest and greatest best model, and how Project Stargate is basically Manhattan Project on steroids. The Manhattan Project produced a nuke. Hopefully we don't produce the next Skynet or Ultron with Stargate. And we also hit on how this is affecting consumers right now. The price of electricity is absolutely skyrocketing because energy is in such high demand. But again, I think with time there will be such a massive energy infrastructure build out. In my opinion, it'll probably be overbuilt as well. So the cost of electricity should come down with time. And finally, we went over some of the companies that will benefit the most from this trend in the categories of AI chips, energy providers, and cloud computing. So I hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you guys think. And that's it for me. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.